Good evening, Trinity Baptist Church. This is a first for us. We do live stream every service we have, but there's always people in here. And today, you're at home and I'm here. I hope everybody's safe. I pray for your safety. I pray for your health. And we're going to begin by praying tonight for John Stockman and for his wife, Sherry. Would you pray with me? Lord God, we just come to you tonight for John and Sherry. We pray, Father, that you bring the healing into John's life. We pray, Father, that you keep him safe. We pray, Father, that while Sherry is at self-quarantine at home, that she will not develop the illness. We just ask that you wrap your loving arms around them, that as they are apart from one another, having difficulty communicating with one another, that you are there in the midst of them, bringing peace of mind and peace of heart. We thank you for Jesus, who died to set us free from our sins. It's in his name that we pray. Amen. A few things before we start. First of all, I have always heard that a television set adds 20 pounds to everybody on it. And I'm guessing that a computer would then add like 30. So I am not nearly as big as I look on your screen right now. Secondly, I have already been told that my head is shining like it has a halo around it. So we may have to employ makeup before the next time that we are together. I've been asking myself all week, what is it we're going to start with tonight? And I think we ought to start right where we are. And that is, how do we handle the disruptions of life? Because that's what's going on right now. A disruption in our economy, disruption in our community, a disruption in our church life. This is affecting us in all kinds of ways that we never expected or experienced before. It's possible that it's going to go longer than 2 weeks. Nobody really knows what's around the corner next. And so as I asked myself that question, how do we handle the disruptions of life? I asked the question, does the Bible specifically speak to that? Now, the Bible does talk a lot about disruptions, and most of the time it's in the form of a story, whether it's in the Old Testament or New Testament. Usually has to do with somebody being sick, or it has to do with sin or demonic possession or whatever it may be, and then we are given how the prophet or Jesus or whomever it is that God places in that person's life deals with that individual. But it's a lot of times it's on an individual basis. A few times it's on a national level, but most of the time an individual basis. So I asked myself, well, if it's not just the individual stories we look at, is there something Jesus specifically said about handling this disruptions of life? And I believe that there is. So I'd like you to take your Bibles, and I'd like you to turn to the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. Now, what I'd like to ask you to do is that over the course of the next week or two, that you read through Matthew 5, 6, and 7 several times and allow it to just sink deeply into your heart and into your mind. We're going to turn tonight to the very end at Matthew chapter 7. So Matthew chapter 7, beginning at verse number 24, reads as follows. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Obviously, Jesus has given us a parable, and in the parable there are two builders who build two houses, one on a solid foundation and one on a foundation of stone. And then all of a sudden, the calamities of life come and hit both houses. The one on the sand falls, the one on the rock does not. Now, Jesus, of course, is telling this story in the nation of Israel. And the first time that I was ever in Israel, we were on a bus tour near the Dead Sea. And as we were traveling by the Dead Sea, there had been this enormous thunderstorm that had come up. Now understand, around the Dead Sea area in the Judean desert, there are areas of that desert that it does not rain but once every 10 years. Once every 10 years. But when it rains, it is just like a torrential flood that takes place. And as we're driving along, there has been this storm about a mile west of us. And as the rains came, they flooded down the hills, filled up what we would call hollows or valleys, what they call wadis. And all of a sudden we found that the road that was in front of us was completely washed out. And so the traffic was stopped up for hours on end as they got people in to try to repair the road so that we could go across it. But as I was seeing what took place, this story came to mind. Jesus is talking to a group of people who understand exactly the lay of the land. And that when it rains, there is always this potential for flood. It's nothing but rock. There's very little vegetation in the Judean desert. And so everything collects in these valleys, and it just becomes a torrent. Jesus said, in that kind of situation, when that happens in life, the guy that built his house on the rock, his house was still standing. The guy that built his house on the sand, though it's lasted for 10 years, for 10 years, it looks just like the other guy's house. For 10 years, everything looks exactly the same on the outside. But then this flood comes, and all of a sudden it's done away with. What we've seen over the past couple of weeks in our society, in Lugoff, Elgin, Columbia, Camden, is exactly that. This was not something that we expected to take place. We've been watching it on the television in China, trying to keep it out of the United States as long as we could, and then all of a sudden it's here. We see the potential deadliness that it has in a place like Italy, where the TV said today that there were 475 people that were killed by the disease just today. There are 4,000 new cases in Italy just today. This is something that has the potential of a torrent. And so when the governor shuts down restaurants, when the governor declares a state of emergency, when the president declares a state of emergency, people whose house is built on the sand rush to whatever store they can find. They buy everything in sight, and they hoard. There's no thought for their neighbor, only for themselves. How is it that they're going to get through this? They are not prepared. You and I are not supposed to be those kind of people. We're supposed to be people whose house, whose life is built on a firm foundation. And the firm foundation that we are built upon is Jesus Christ and the teaching of Jesus Christ. It's interesting how Jesus begins this. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man. Now already we know from the start of Matthew chapter 5 that Jesus is not preaching an evangelistic message. It says specifically in Matthew chapter 5 verse number 1 that he sees the crowd and calls his disciples together, and then he begins to teach. So this is a passage for people who already have made a profession of faith in Jesus Christ. He is not talking about becoming a Christian here. He is talking about how to live the Christian life. That's what he's been talking about during the entire sermon. And he sums up the entire sermon with this story. And in this story, he said, let me tell you who the wise disciple is, who the true disciple is somebody who hears what I have to say and then also does it. It's not just someone who makes a profession of faith and goes their way, but it's somebody who makes a profession of faith with a real commitment in their life. And when you and I are planted firmly in Jesus Christ, then what that means is we are going to hear what he has to say, and we're going to do it. Wrote down a few thoughts. Every disruption in life is an opportunity to display our devotion to Christ. Every disruption in life, whether it's this one, whether it's losing a job, whether it's getting sick ourselves, whether it's retirement, whether it's the death of a loved one, whatever it may be, whenever there is a disruption in our life, it is an opportunity for us to display the fact that we are disciples of Jesus Christ. It's as simple as that. And in that display, we are to display what we call our faith. Listen to this one. Oftentimes, only in times of crisis can one's faith be truly proven. You know, as long as things are going along pretty well, as long as the economy's well, as long as we have our jobs, as long as we have our health, as long as we're getting along pretty much with everybody else, we're rocking along in life, it's not so difficult to maintain and say that we are people of faith. But when a crisis, when a disruption in our life comes along, that's when we find out if our faith was real or not. Now let's understand what faith is, particularly in the crisis that we're in right now. Faith is not foolishness. Faith is not denial. For me to walk around and say, well, you know, it doesn't matter what the governor says, it doesn't matter who seems to be sick, it's not going to happen to me, we can do whatever we want, that's foolishness, that's not faith. Now, it may not be, if I caught the virus, that it would be as bad for me as it is for, say, John Stockton, who's in the hospital right now. But the point of the fact is, number one, I don't know that. And number two, I could then become a potential carrier, didn't even know it, and I spread it to people that it's detrimental to. So, being a person of faith in the midst of this doesn't mean I walk around like it's not happening. That's denial. It doesn't mean that I walk around and don't take basic precautions. Well, I'm going to shake everybody's hand. I'm going to hug everybody. Well, no, I'm not going to do that. Because faith does not rule out good common sense and reason. Because God is the one that gave us reason. The Bible particularly says that God is a God of order. God is a God of reason. Now, faith may take me beyond reason, but it will never stand against reason. It's as simple as that. A solid foundation comes from combining authentic commitment to Christ with persevering obedience. So as I look through this particular sermon, and I'm asking myself, how is it that I live out what Christ has said in the midst of what I'm seeing right now? I came up with 5 simple, practical things that I'd like to give to y'all. First of all, don't worry. Don't worry. That's exactly what Jesus said in the sermon. Don't worry. God has taken care of the birds of the air. God takes care of the lilies of the field. Do you not think that God is going to take care of you? Don't worry. Now, that does not mean that I shouldn't plan. It does not mean that I shouldn't be prepared. Naturally, I should do those things. But it says that by worrying, I don't add a single hour to my life. So I don't need to worry. That's number 1. Number 2, I need to share, not hoard. I need to share, not hoard. And this goes into the very next one, which is I'm going to go ahead and give you. We need to check on those who are elderly in our congregation, in our community, in our families. We need to check on those who are disabled. We need to check on people with underlying conditions daily. We need to give them a call. We need to recognize that by the isolation that is taking place, that many people are suffering loneliness. They may not be suffering want. They may not be suffering from the virus, but because they cannot get out and come to church, because they don't feel like they need to go to the grocery store right now, they've got everything they need, and all of a sudden they are socially isolated from everybody else. They need us to call them. They need us to check on them. They need us to offer to go to the store for them if they are afraid to get out. Because indeed, they may have some underlying condition where they may be of such an age that they are actually afraid of contracting this virus, which I totally understand. And so should all of us. So there are people in our church who really don't have anyone else around them right now. Their kids have moved away. They are alone. It may be a couple that are elderly. There are people in your community, in your neighborhoods. There are people in your family that are this way. And you and I need to step up our game. And in the middle of the devastation of this crisis, we need to display our faith for the glory of Jesus Christ. And how are we going to do that? We're not going to worry. We're going to plan. We're going to be prepared, but we're not going to worry. Number two, we're going to share and not hoard. And number three, we're going to check on those around us on an everyday basis. And when they need something, we're going to get up, we're going to go to the store, and we're going to bring it to their home. And it may be that they don't even want to talk to us. We're going to leave it on the porch for them. Or they're going to talk to us at the door. That is perfectly fine. But that is something that we need to do. Fourth, instead of seeing this as a time where all of a sudden you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything, there's no restaurants open, there's nothing to go and do, and you're bored, instead of just sitting in front of the TV all the time, take the opportunity to use the next 2 weeks, and it may be longer, to reconnect with your spouse, to reconnect with your kids, to reconnect with whoever's home. Do something together. I can remember when I was a kid growing up, and girlfriend and I talk about it all the time because it used to snow back home a lot more than it does now. And there were times, I remember when I was in the 7th grade, we were out of school the entire month of January except for like 2 days. And we had a ball. We were totally isolated. We couldn't go anywhere. There was ice and snow everywhere. And we had a ball. And it wasn't just us, it was our folks too. Because we played games, we worked puzzles, we went outside and played in the snow. There was nothing that we didn't do together. And some of the greatest times I remember growing up with my mom and my dad were those times. This can work the same way if you choose it to. Or you can go to work every day, you stop at the convenience store or the grocery store because that's the only thing open, you go home and you look at your wife, or wife looks at her husband and looks at the kids and says, I'm bored to death, there's nothing on TV, what are we going to do about it? Every one of us has a choice about how we want to handle this. Actually, this came up at my house about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Pam and I were about ready to go to bed, and we had been watching Netflix again, and we have literally seen everything on Netflix that we want to watch. There's a whole lot on Netflix we don't want to watch. It's time to go to bed. We get to bed, and I looked at her and I said, I am so bored. It's raining all the time. It's cold. There's no yard work to do. There's no gardening to do right now. And all we have is TV, and there's absolutely nothing on. And she looks over at me and she said, why don't we buy you some watercolors? Let me explain. Before we got married, I used to take art classes, and I painted portraits in oil and learned some acrylics. And then gave it up after we got married because life just got busy and we were in school, and then we had kids, and 35 years later, I'm bored one night. And for the past 20 years, I've been saying, I'd like to take a watercolor class over at the Fine Arts Center. Well, would you believe in the past 20 years, there's not been a single watercolor class taught at the Fine Arts Center because she has checked every single time because she was going to enroll me. She looks at me and she says, why don't we go and I used some watercolors. I said, well, there's no class for me to take. She said, well, you have your art books. Why don't you just teach yourself? And I lay there for about 5 minutes, and I thought, well, it's better than what's on TV. I said, okay, let's go to one. So we went, and we bought all the stuff I needed for watercolors. I got out my old books, looked through them, and started painting. Every single night that we had been home, when we weren't in church, or I didn't have something I had to do with church, we have together, I have painted and she scrapbooks. And we have talked, and we have laughed, and we have listened to the radio, and we have had the time of our lives. Now, I'm not saying that I'm very good at watercolor, but I look at her almost every day. Okay, we're gonna paint the scrapbook tonight. It's something that we do together that doesn't involve the television. Share what you have. Don't hoard. Don't worry. Call on people who need your help, who need my help, who need our help. Take time to reconnect with your family. Find something to do that's fun. If the sun does shine, go outside and work in the yard. They didn't say we couldn't go outside. They didn't say we had to stay in the house. We go outside anytime we want to. And we can have fun again together as families. Instead of seeing this in the negative light, try to look on this as a time that God has given each of us to build a strong family. And it may be that it lasts more than 2 weeks, and if it does, that will just give us more time to build our family and make it even stronger. And lastly, take some time and reconnect with God. This is an opportunity to say, hey, you know what we want to do tonight? Let's pick up a good book and each of us just sit on the back porch and read. And I know an excellent book for you to read. It's called your Bibles. Decide on a book of the New Testament that you want to read through and just read through it. Do some study with it. Just sit there and read it and enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. Allow God to speak to you. When we think about reconnecting with God, lots of times we're talking about prayer, and prayer is very important. Prayer is us speaking to God. But there is also this other part to prayer that says that God needs and wants to speak to us, and He has spoken to us through the book that He's given. So take some time and reconnect with God. Let me go through those 5 things one more time. First of all, don't worry. Secondly, share, don't hoard. Third, call on somebody each day and check on them and make sure they're okay and see if there's something you can do for them. 4, reconnect with your spouse and your family. Number 5, reconnect with God. Before I leave you tonight, I have thought about us being apart, and that is different. You're at home tonight, and I'm here with just a few other people who are helping me do this. What can we do to stay close to each other, even though we're separated? And I believe I have an answer. Starting this Sunday, and it will last for 2 weeks or however many weeks we are absent from one another. Starting this Sunday, as a part of the service, while we're absent from one another, we're going to take the Lord's Supper together. There is nothing that I know of that we do that brings us closer together than taking the Lord's Supper. So here's what I want to ask you to do. Between now and Sunday, make sure you have some crackers in the pantry. Make sure you have some juice on hand. And Sunday morning at 10:30, go ahead and get those out. Have the crackers on a little plate. Fill however many juice glasses you need. I'm going to have here on the communion table enough for myself and for Kelly and for Pam and Alan, because that's who's here with me. And together, you at home and us here, this Sunday, and we're going to take it together the next Sunday, and we're going to take it together as long as we are apart every single Sunday morning to remind ourselves that we are bound together by something greater than just this building that we worship in. We are bound together by the blood of Jesus Christ. And when we all come back together, hopefully before Easter, the first thing we're going to do when we come back together on a Sunday morning is we're going to take the Lord's Supper with all of us together. Would you pray with me? Lord God, we thank you for the technology that allows for us to be connected together tonight. We are reminded that we are not supposed to be people who panic. We are not supposed to be people who hoard. We are not supposed to be people who think only of ourselves. But that when we build on the firm foundation of the teaching of Jesus Christ, that we are also to do that teaching. We're to share with others. We're to check on other people. We are to display your glory in the midst of the devastation that has taken place in our society. We're to take the time to reconnect with each other and our families, and we're to take this time to reconnect with you. We praise you, God, for what you are going to do with us through all of this. In Christ Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to you being there on Sunday morning at 10:30. And remember, be set up, and we're going to take the Lord's Supper together. God bless all of you, and may He keep you safe.